Hi everybody. Today I'm in Puerh city and it's the beginning of the year and we've been very busy so far. We have many new projects this year and today I'm going to talk about one of them. We started importing wine from France and it got me the opportunity to study how wine is sold worldwide and what kind of different models you can find for the wine business. And it turns out that in the wine you have like the New World and the Old World. The Old World would be Europe and the New World like all the other wine producing countries like Australia, the US, Chile, Argentina. And I think this situation is very similar to tea actually, where the Old World would be China, Taiwan, maybe Japan, and then the New World would be India, Kenya, Sri Lanka. And what we find similarities actually between the wine and the tea industry in the way that the Old World is mainly made of small producers. For example, in China, most of the tea is made by family businesses or small companies with less than 10 employees. While if you go to Kenya or Sri Lanka, it's mainly tea estates run by probably hundreds of employees. So the wine is the same situation actually. And so it got me thinking about how as small-scale tea producers we could foster tradition, you could say, or how can we as a group of small tea producers, how could we push on making higher quality tea? How could we promote these teas and have the consumers understand this complexity? If you're a wine enthusiast and you're into French wine, it will be impossible for you to know every winery in France because there are too many of them. Okay, so what France does is they have these geographic indications. And it means that when you buy a bottle of wine, you can know if it's from Bordeaux, and you can even know down to a smaller area. That could be, for example, Médoc, or even a village like Saint-Émilion. And if you go to Burgundy, for example, these geographic indications go down, for the best ones, they go down to a vineyard, like a small plot, actually, of vines. And we don't have this system in the Puerh tea world. So it got me thinking. The problem is, as I mentioned several times before, there's a lot of mislabeling on the tea market. So for example, if you're in Beijing, you go to the tea market and you want to buy a cake of Jingmai. Well, how do you know you're going to buy a genuine cake from Jingmai Mountain? And I guess if you don't know anything about tea, your best bet would be to buy from a big company. Let's say you want to buy Lao Banzhang tea. Well, let's say you want to buy it as a gift, for example, a gift that would give you a good face, like people have to know that this gift is expensive. You can't really buy any Lao Banzhang for maybe, I don't know, $1,000 a cake. How can you be sure you get the real stuff? What you're going to do instead is you're going to buy some Hao. That's the largest factory that's known to source a significant part of Lao Banzhang tea. And they have these Lao Banzhang cakes. And these have a market price. Like everybody can know the price of this tea on the market. So in this business, I think the big companies have an edge, even when it comes to promoting the small terroirs, the small producing areas, because only the big companies can guarantee the authenticity of their teas. Because it would be illegal, for example, to sell my teas as Tai tea or as Hao tea or as Lansang Gucha tea. These are all brands and it's illegal to use the name of that brand. It's protected by law. But using Jingmai or Bingdao on my cake, it's not illegal. Actually, I can label my cake with any name I want. It's totally not illegal to mislabel the teas. And I think it creates a lot of harm to the industry and especially to the small producers. Because, well, as you know, there are huge differences in prices between areas. And if you're a good businessman and if you really want to make money, your best bet is actually to source tea from cheap areas with no reputation and label them as famous areas, like as Bingdao, Laobanzang, Yiwu, Jingmai. And if your tea is really good, then maybe people will believe you and you will be able to sell this tea cake that maybe cost you $10 to make. You'll be able to sell it for $150, $200, $500. The more famous the indication is, the higher the incentive is to fake that tea, to mislabel it. Actually, I guess there's not a lot of money to be made in selling genuine Laobanzang tea because everybody knows the price of the tea in the mountain. It's information that you can easily find on the internet. So, well, I think last year the price in the mountain was about $1,200 per kilo. Let's say it's $1,200 per kilo in the mountain. You're going to take it back to Beijing, and if you want to sell it in your tea shop, well, Beijing is a very expensive place, so you will have to pay for your shop, for your employees and everything. So maybe you'll want to sell maybe $3,000 per kilo. That would be, I guess, a quite common margin made by a retailer. But the problem is that this price, not a lot of people will be willing to buy your tea because they go on the internet and they see the price is $1,200. So the transparency in price actually also drives that mislabeling. So maybe if you still want to make good Laobanzang tea and still make money, maybe you can blend it a bit. You go to Laomana and you put a third of Laomana good material in your Laobanzang tea, and there you can have your margin. So this doesn't occur in the wine business in France because we have those geographic indications and they are quite strictly regulated. So it would be, it's impossible, for example, to call a wine Saint-Emilion if it wasn't made in Saint-Emilion. I think it would be great for the Puerh tea industry to have such a system put in place. Now, in France, it took, I would say, maybe 50 years in order to create the legal framework and then have these labels really made popular to the consumers. Actually, they started creating this label, these indications in Burgundy in the 1930s, at a time when Burgundy wine had a reputation and a lot of wine producers would label their wine as Burgundy wine. And so the Burgundy producers got a bit upset about it. So what they did is they formed a union and they lobbied the government to make it illegal to label the wine as Burgundy if it's not from Burgundy. Okay, so first we had that agreement between the Burgundy producers. They got unionized. Then they lobbied the government to establish a legal framework. But it's not the end of the story, because at that time it was just a geographical indication. It meant that if you were in the determined area, you could sell any wine produced there as Burgundy wine. And what happened is that smart businessmen came to Burgundy and they made very cheap wine, so they reduced the cost as much as possible. So it was terrible wine, but it had this legal geographical indication. So it could be sold as Burgundy wine, even though the wine did not live up to the reputation of the place. So that was a new problem that occurred. And from that time, that's what pushed the producers to adopt some quality specifications in order to get the label. So in that kind of labels, you have two kinds of labels. Geographical indication only protects the fact that it was made in a specific area. It doesn't tell anything about the quality. And then the further label that we have in France, which is called AOC, appellation d'origine contrôlée, so controlled appellation of origin. It's different in the way that not only you should make the wine in a specific area, but you should also follow some specifications that are supposed to guarantee that your wine is of a decent quality and is of a nature that reflects the terroir, that is true to the terroir. So in the wine industry in France, for example, it could be specifications about plantation density. It could be about maximum yield that you can get in your vines. It could be about processing techniques, and namely things that you aren't allowed to use. So some people have also criticized this because they are afraid it might hinder innovation. Now it's a policy that France has chosen to keep its terroir a kind of authentic by limiting the innovation you could get and by inciting the producers in using some specific techniques which are recognized as traditional for each area. You don't have that problem in Australia, for example, where usually the larger scale winemakers are free to use the most recent techniques, the most innovative techniques to make their wines. So maybe they can give you new nice tastes, maybe they can lower their costs, but it's hard for them to get they don't have any concept of authenticity. Their terroirs are not supposed to taste in a specific way or another. So we're going to start with Jingmai. This year I really want to get into that part of tea, more the political part, where I'd like to see what we can do to improve the industry as a whole. Because it's easy to criticize the mislabeling and be cynical about it. But what we can see is that 100 years ago in France, it was the same situation where you couldn't really trust the origin of the wine you bought. And they lobbied the government, they passed some laws, they established some frameworks, and now you can trust the industry. And even if you don't know anything about wine, you can buy a really expensive wine. As long as you get the money, it's unlikely you'll get a fake, because we have that good system in place. That means that an average consumer is more willing to spend money into good wine, because he knows that he will get what he paid for. And I'm sure if there was more transparency in Puerh tea, I'm sure the market would grow. A lot of consumers who nowadays just buy average tea would be willing to pay extra to get those great teas. So we want to start with Jingmai. We'd like to first kind of follow the French history and start by creating a geographical indication in Jingmai Mountain. It would consist, I think, in an effet that we would insert in the cake, and there are counterfeit-proof effets that Dai uses, which are made a bit like banknotes, which are supposedly very hard to falsify. So we could create an effet for the mountain, and all the tea that's pressed on the mountain would be allowed, would be able to be labeled with that effet. That would be a very simple method, because we have checkpoints on the at the entrance of Jingmai. So the cars are checked, and you're not allowed to import tea from outside. And as far as I know, it's pretty much enforced, really. Now, of course, we could study on how to make it even more stringent and make sure that no tea from outside comes to the mountain. But then, if all the tea in the mountain is Jingmai tea, then we can just, there are a couple of tea pressing factories on Jingmai Mountain. We could give them those neifeis and tell them that if the producers want to, they can press these neifei in their cakes. For this geographical indication to work, it would be very important that the barriers to entry are low, so that all of the tea producers in Jingmai can press those neifeis if they want. And it'd be great if all of the tea producers press neifeis. Why? First, there will be more tea cakes with the geographical indication on the market, so it will provide more visibility to the consumers, and hopefully the knowledge of this label will spread faster, because nothing exists at this time in the Chinese tea market about this. So we need to tell the consumers about this. So first reason, we need high numbers of this label just to spread it to the consumers. Second, you could say that if all of the producers in Jingmai press this label, then any other tea that would be labeled as Jingmai but which wouldn't have this geographical indication would not be genuine Jingmai tea. So I think it's important to take away the argument from the seller. If only a part of those labels had the label, then a seller of fake tea would just tell that this tea is genuine Jingmai tea, the farmers just didn't press the label in the cake. But if all of the farmers press this label, then it will be a good counter to all the mislabeling that's occurring. Because I think at this point it's unrealistic to prohibit the mislabeling as a whole. The market is too big, there wouldn't be enough enforcement of this. So I think we should just start with that label, but other factories can still put any names they want on the cake. Anyway, politically that would be much easier to push, okay? We're just pushing for the creation of a label and not the prohibition of all kind of mislabeling. And third, it's important that the barriers to entry are low, because some tentatives have been made in the past. The problem is they wanted very high securities, and it ended up a bit like the organic certification in China, which is so stringent that only the big companies can have this certification. Now, if that was the case with Jingmai tea, it wouldn't work, because I would say probably 60% of Jingmai tea is made and sold by small-scale producers, like companies with less than 10 people, and most of them being family-run businesses. Now, if these businesses don't have access to the label, it would be too bad. And the problem is, the big companies are not the most interested in those labels, because these big companies, they can sell on their own brand, okay? In Puerh, for example, our neighbor is Bulang Gongzhou, Princess Bulang, which is one of the largest tea factories in Jingmai. They are locals from Mangjing, and they were able to press that kind of label that was made a couple of years ago. But the boss told me that she doesn't use them anymore because they are pointless, because they sell mainly their brand. Their customers, they want Princess Bulang tea, and so they know it's Jingmai tea. They don't need a label to complement that. Now, as a small-scale tea producer, it's different. You're not gonna, well, we have our own brand, but we're kind of the exception. Most of the small-scale tea producers will sell tea as loose-leaf tea and will press it into cakes for their customers. So they will press under different brands, okay? And I think that would be a great value for these middlemen, for these customers to have this label, because then the tea boss goes to Jingmai and buys 100 kilo of loose-leaf tea to the producer. Then the producer helps the customer press in Jingmai with the middleman's label. And then the middleman, he goes back to Guangzhou. He can sell his tea to other tea shops and say, look, there's that label on the tea cake, so it proves it's a genuine Jingmai tea cake. And thus, this cake has more value on the market and has more resale value. You don't really need to trust the person to know that it's a genuine Jingmai tea. So I think that would be a great advantage for all the actors involved in the supply chain who want to sell genuine tea, actually. I think the only actors who would be hurt by this would be those who do sell fake tea, actually, and who would have that competition from the label. Now, to go back to the small producer, the difference between a large company and a small-scale producer is that usually the small-scale producer won't have a marketing budget, either the capital or even maybe the knowledge and the time to create a brand. And you could say that this label would act as their brand, and then this brand could be promoted. So just like if you buy wine in France, most of the time you're not aware of you don't know in advance the producer of this wine. Most of the time you're going to look at the label, at the geographic indication, and that will give you hints about the taste and possibly the quality. Let me have a cup of, a glass of Oriental Beauty. I love this Oriental Beauty because it can be brewed in many different ways. So today I tried in a glass wine, and I find it very convenient. You can gongfu it, you can drink it in a big mug or anything. It's great. So the plan of action for this year is to create a syndicate, to create a union in Jingmai, a union of the tea producers of Jingmai. And I want the barriers to entry to be as low as possible. It means that if you're in Jingmai, you can join the union. Then this union would have a delegation that would talk with the government about the creation of this label. I think the government would support the creation of such a label, especially if the label is managed by the union, because I was told by some government official that a main hindrance for such action is the face and the reputation. Let's say the government creates the label themselves and then this label fails. The government will lose face. The officials who pushed for this will lose face. While if it's a union of producer that pushes for this label, well, you could say the responsibility is more diluted, and it's not directly the government that's involved. The government only has to validate the recommendation, the requests of the union. So I think that would be a better way to do it in the Chinese context. Now, this union would have also several advantages. This union needs to make money, so I think we should have the producers pay a bit for each of the nei fei they get. You know, even if it's just like $50 per neife. That would be plenty actually if we press all of the cakes in Jingmai. The union having money would be very useful because then we could create a brand. Well, we could promote this label, we could do advertising, we could pay some experts to do more work on Jingmai, and maybe why not consider record some history of Jingmai, doing surveys, doing more research, and maybe writing a book in the name of the union, so that the terroir of Jingmai is promoted all over China. I would say one of the differences between French wine and Puerh tea is that you can see that the concept of terroir in wine in France is much more advanced. If you go to Bordeaux, for example, you will have very detailed maps of the place, and they will be able to tell you a lot about the soil, the geological history, the history of the place, the traditions, different winemaking techniques. You could say they are a bit more technical, a bit more scientific. And I think it would be possible to use this approach in Jingmai. Now, the problem is I'm not a geologist, and I cannot really analyze the geological history of Jingmai, but maybe the union could pay to invite some experts and write some reports on this, so that we can tell the story, because in the end, this is as much a taste product as it is a cultural product. Along with the taste and the quality of the tea, we also sell that story, that culture. And I think it's better to sell a story that is based on reality, on the history, on science. Well, you can say every tea shop sells a story, whether it is on the science, like we do. We sell a story based on agriculture and different producing techniques and stuff. Others will sell a story based on art, a story based on philosophy, a story based on health benefits, or anything. But I think the scientific and historical side, we could do it way better if we were united in Jingmai as a union, and if we had a large budget. Because you can imagine that if each small-scale producer contributes to the union, then we probably would have a higher marketing budget than the big companies in Jingmai. And so that would be a great way to sustain that small-scale producer model. Then I think a union would be interesting in order for the tea producers to start talking about the terroir, really. I find out that most of the producers are quite passive towards their customers. Most of the time, their customers will come and will push their specifications on the tea farmer. So, for example, they want it processed more red or more green, strong chaching, or handmade tea, machine-made tea, things like that. It's often down to it's often the middleman, the tea buyer, who will decide on this. And I think it's too bad, because it removes a certain control of the terroir that the producers are supposed to have. If you look at the French wine, usually you will find that each producer is quite proud of his products, and they put some thought into it. They decide how the wine should be grown and processed. And when I talked about the specifications of the AOC of the indications in the wine industry, they are decided by the union. So the producers, the wine producers, gather and they discuss what should be the taste of their terroir, what should be the regulations. Some indications have very stringent regulations, so you could say that they will produce a quite narrow range of tastes, so that when the consumer buys a wine from that place, he knows in advance what the taste will be like. And some other indications are on the looser side, which means that you are allowed for more freedom, more innovation within one setting. And I think this degree of authenticity, consistency, tradition versus innovation and experiments, I think this should be discussed between the tea producers in Jingmai, and they should decide whether there should be any quality measures at all, and if there are, how stringent they should be. Because for now, I think every one of us, including you as consumers, have in mind a kind of typical Jingmai taste. But if you start really discussing that taste with the tea producers, it gets very blurry actually. If you dig in, you can find that we have many different opinions, or most often no specific opinion at all, because there is that diversity. So we would need to discuss this as a collective, and I think this will drive us to learn more about our tea mountain and to discover our terroir. I think that's the word, really, discovering a terroir, and even the producers have to do it. Don't think that even though these Jingmai tea producers have been there for over 1,000 years, don't think that they necessarily know that much about the area. I think a lot of knowledge was lost during the Cultural Revolution, during the communist era, when the tea production was collectivized, because then it means that there was no individual tea producers, so there was no point in having that knowledge, and it maybe some of it, like the knowledge of the microclimates and things like that, or maybe it's still there, but we really have to ask the right people and collect different information. Probably each farmer knows about his own tea garden, and if we piece the information together, maybe we will have a clearer picture of what Jingmai is like. So it's very interesting to do this research. So now my first step will be to create a union. So when I go back to Jingmai for the Chinese New Year, I will just gather I will go to several villages. I will gather the people and start talking, explaining my project. So creating a union and creating a geographical indication, and then start talking about quality. Have people drink each other's tea, and try to think harder about tea making, because I think it's still lacking a bit, and it's lacking, and it's not. Usually you would hear that, oh, it's because they are not educated and things like that. But how educated were the wine growers in Burgundy in the 1930s? I guess most of them didn't even go to middle school, right? So I think it's not the right argument to say that it's a lack of education. It's mainly a lack of organization, and maybe just because people, there needs to be a dynamic for this. So I hope that soon we will have that label done, and that all of Jingmai tea will be labeled, and that you can make sure that you get a genuine Jingmai tea. Now, I don't know when this will happen or if it will happen, but at least I will lobby and work hard for this. Thanks for watching, and see you next time. Bye-bye.